On this episode of the IGTV series, The Best of the Our View podcast, I'm happy to present part of my conversation with Judy Heumann. Judy is a civil rights and disability advocate and activist, and we share our different experiences of growing up at different times in the United States with disabilities. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and let us know in the comments what you were able to get from this conversation. It's always great to interact with you all, and I really hope you enjoy this. Well, you mentioned in your book that you were the only child with a disability in your neighborhood, and how was that growing up with other kids who didn't have disabilities? Were you able to participate in a lot of their activities? Did they include you in things, or were you excluded?
In my neighborhood, it was a middle-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, and they were all small private homes, either attached or detached. And my parents had moved in I guess, 1948. I was born in December of 47, and they moved to Brooklyn when I was 3 months old. And it was after the Second World War, and so there were a number of families who had recently moved in or had only been there a few years and had kids, and so it was kind of a close-knit area, and there were numbers of families that were having children. So when I had polio, people knew my family and they knew me. And my mother was pregnant with my brother. She was 8 months pregnant when I had polio. So after being in and out of the hospital for a number of years, I was really a part of the neighborhood. And my neighbors were our friends. The kids played together. I played with them. I was in a brownie troop, which was up the block. I'm Jewish. There's a church up the block that had the brownie troop, and we played together, and we learned how to make accommodations. So I remember I wore braces at that point and used a wheelchair, which I still do. I don't wear braces anymore. And I remember my friends putting skates on my feet, and another friend, roller skating and pushing my wheelchair. And even did that once when they froze over we had little backyards, froze it over, and people were ice skating and put ice skates on my feet.
Oh, wow.
And we just, we just accommodated the Girl Scout brownie games and things. And I would turn the rope because I didn't jump. But, I remember when I was younger, both with my family and my uncles and aunts and kids, and in that part of the neighborhood, we were just all friends. And my disability obviously affected things like the houses weren't accessible, and I had to scream out, to call a friend out, or be lifted into the house, those things. But of course, that all started to slowly change as education was denying me what other kids were getting. And I think really at that point, it was beginning to why is this happening? And it was a gradual transition for me as I was getting older to start thinking about the fact that I was being treated differently because I used a wheelchair.
Yeah, for me, I grew up in a very small suburban town outside of Philadelphia in New Jersey, and very small town. My elementary school had 100, maybe 120 kids total from kindergarten through sixth grade. And we were all very close, and a majority of outside of school, I have a very large family. My dad is one of 10 children. My mom is one of 7. My maternal grandmother was one of 14. So I have a very large family. So a lot of my friends growing up and even still to today are my relatives, my cousins.
Do they live in the same area?
Yes, yes. A lot of us are still in the same area, and outside of the pandemic, if they don't live inside in New Jersey, we travel to see each other in Maryland and California and everywhere. So we, so that was my experience of being, around friends and in my neighborhood and in my family. Like you said, of course, your disability was known and everybody knew it, but they made accommodations. I always went to the playground with them, and uh, same thing with skating. I did have more mobility in my legs, so they actually put me on skates. uh,
Wow.
yeah, to do some roller skating. I do remember that, and I have pictures of that. One of the local organizations in my mom's old neighborhood, where they did like youth programs and things like that. They had a skating party every holiday season around Christmas. So they would take me there, and they would put on skates, and I would, wheel around with somebody holding my hands up to, help me get around. And um, so it's really, like you said, the intergenerational between the two of us, but having very similar stories in that way, I think is really, really interesting. You can listen or watch the rest of this episode in its entirety by subscribing to the Our View podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Just search for the Our View podcast on all platforms.